Hi, my name is Art Murphy, and some of you know me, some of you don't, some of you met me recently. But I wanted to tell you what I'm here to talk about is fusion power. And I don't know if there's anybody in the audience who has any kind of engineering background. Anybody? Okay. So you might know something about what fusion power is as opposed to what we have today in terms of nuclear energy. But actually, sort of in reference to what Daniel was just going through, it just occurred to me there was an old saying from a while ago that somebody who was living on Spam for a long time might think that's okay until they find out what steak is. And I'm talking about the kind of Spam that you used to get in a can, right? Not the stuff on the computer. But anyway, we're going to talk today about what real steak is all about. In other words, what a real energy system is, and what mankind actually can be doing. Really, as soon as we impeach Obama and get Glass-Steagall, this is the direction that the nation and mankind will actually be going in. So to begin, let me see if I can get this thing out. Get rid of him. And all right, now does anybody know what this is?
The sun.
All right, but do you know what it actually is?
The hydrogen furnace.
It's a fusion reaction. It's a gigantic fusion reactor, right? And this thing, what they've figured out is that the way that this thing is powered is by this continuous fusion reaction. And I'll explain what fusion is in a minute. But the idea is that the temperatures at the center of the sun are what they estimate about 40 million degrees, right? That's a lot hotter than anything we know of on Earth. And that keeps the sun going, and it's been going for several billions of years, and probably a few more billion years from now. And it's in the process of doing that, that created all the planets and everything else we have in the solar system and all of that. Now, what is this? Well, it's not the Milky Way. Well, actually, part of it is the Milky Way. The spots you see that are close, like these are the stars that are part of our Milky Way galaxy. But that's another galaxy, maybe Andromeda or something like that. But what that represents, if you're just looking at it, is billions of fusion reactors. Now, every one of these stars and spots of light and blobs of light represents fusion reactions going on. And that's what we're going to be talking about, what that really is. And then here's another example here. Here we are on the Earth. We have a satellite out orbiting Saturn. That's the planet Saturn there, right? And they just took this photograph, or a series of photographs they put together as a mosaic. From behind Saturn, the sun's on the other side, so it's like on the night side of Saturn, right? And what NASA did was they identified, you can't see it, but they identified what you're seeing. These are different moons of Saturn, but here is the Earth and the moon. And here's Mars. It's very small, so you can't really see it from this perspective. But that's where you're looking at, right? You're looking back into the center of the solar system from behind Saturn. The sun's on the other side, and there's the Earth, and there's Mars, doing their orbits, right? Anyway, that's what humanity is actually able to do now. We can actually get that far away from ourselves and take a picture of ourselves looking back. That's pretty interesting. I don't think any monkeys could do that. Anyway. And then this is a good example. This is this was produced by Westinghouse Corporation quite a while ago, but it's what's called the electromagnetic spectrum. Now, the thing that I want to point out is two things. One is that everything that you and I and everybody else can see with our eyes is literally just this little sliver. That's visible light. All the colors of the rainbow are within that little space, that little white spot there. that's the colors of the rainbow from red up to purple. Right? That's all it is. That's all you can see. Everything else is gamma rays, X-rays, infrared, ultraviolet, radio waves, things like that. Sound waves that we're hearing are in the level of, a dozen or so cycles per second up to a few thousand. So that's all you can hear. Now what I'm using this to illustrate, there's a whole lot of the universe that we don't have any perception of because we have certain five senses and they are very limited. So what scientific discoveries about is figuring out how the world really works, not based on our five senses, but based on figuring out what the principles are. What's actually going on behind the scene, so to speak, And this, I'm not going to explain a lot about this, but this is just to illustrate something. These are all the elements of that we know about. Right? Now it goes from the lightest, which is hydrogen, down to the really the heavy elements that are like uranium here, plutonium here, thorium. These are the ones we generally use in nuclear reactions for power plants, right? Uranium. Now these are very heavy. They call them heavy elements, right? These are extremely light. You got ordinary things like iron, cobalt, copper, right there, silver, gold, right? Anyway, that just gives you a sense that there's a whole array of different elements that make up everything we have, right? Everything in the universe. And I'm going to focus mostly on hydrogen, and helium is over there. That's the next heaviest. Hydrogen, helium, and then uranium way down here. So what is fusion energy? First of all, what we have today, in terms of atomic power plants, nuclear power plants, is it's based on using a fuel which is a form of uranium. And the idea is that uranium is a very large atom. It's got 92 protons. The protons are the positively charged part of the atom, and it's got the remainder up to 235 are neutrons, which are neutrally charged particles within the center of the atom. What happens is it will split and give off a lot of energy because there's a lot of energy holding it together. And it splits and it releases energy. And it becomes actually other elements. It transforms itself into other elements, and it could be different elements. It doesn't have to be these two. So, but it always releases energy. Now, in the fusion reaction is really, in a sense, the opposite, because you're taking the lightest elements, which are forms of hydrogen, and you're bringing them together. And that creates a new element, which turns out to be helium. And then the neutron is an extra neutron that gets thrown off, and a tremendous amount of energy is released by that process, right? Now, what is this? Deuterium, tritium. Well, when I went back to that periodic table, the most abundant element in the entire universe is hydrogen, which is basically one proton and an electron that's negatively charged that's surrounding it. I'm not going to say circling it because we don't even know exactly what these things do. It's sort of just an example, a way of describing it. But what happens is that there's a very important... Pardon?
Could you speak up, please?
Oh, I'm sorry. Deuterium.
Deuterium, you said it was
Deuterium.
hydrogen.
Well, hydrogen has, in other words, there's a very important word which is called isotope, which most people probably aren't familiar with, but it's a term, I-S-O-T-O-P-E, isotope, which refers to the fact that elements can actually take on more neutrons within the nucleus of the atom. So you have hydrogen with one proton. If it adds a neutron or it adds two neutrons, it becomes deuterium or tritium. And if you combine, you can see it's just an addition here. You put them together, and then they release energy, and you get one neutron in the helium with two protons now and two neutrons. Now, I know this is getting a little technical, but I don't want to get into a long technical discussion of anything. I just want to give you a sense of this. This is useful because it shows you how much power we're talking about. If you say 1 unit of energy equals the amount of energy used by one citizen in 1 year, when you do this reaction, you end up, according to Einstein's E equals mc squared, you got 676 units. So the reaction creates about 676 times more energy coming out of it than you put into it. That's what fusion is. So that obviously stars put out a lot of power, right? They work. They've been working for billions of years, and there's billions and billions and billions of, I don't know, there's probably billions of galaxies which have billions of stars and all of that. So what the issue is that that mankind has got to basically figure out how to make this work here on Earth. Because I'll get to that in a second. That's just another illustration of the same reaction there. Now, actually, let me just backtrack a little bit, because what we're really getting at in this whole discussion is, what is it that makes human beings different from animals? And what is it that we have to, why is that the basis of solving the problem? Well, there's one fundamental thing that all the archaeologists have discovered, going back as far as you can find in these digs. The most ancient, sites where human beings were found. And does anybody know what the sort of the key thing that proves that it was human beings in this? Fire, right? That people use fire. Now, can anybody sort of in their imagination imagine why it was that the first of our ancestors decided it was a good idea to pick up that burning stick? I mean, animals don't do that. They don't like fire. They run away from it, right?
Makes heat and cook.
Yeah, well, you gotta know that that's going to happen ahead of time, right? That's the other thing that human beings do that animals do not do. We actually think about the future. We can look at the future. We can actually see the future and decide we're going to act in a certain way to bring that future into being, right? We're going to say, all right, it makes sense to take this burning stick, which is otherwise very hot and very dangerous, put it together with other sticks, get them all on fire, throw that rabbit in there and cook them. Or whatever they might have done, right? It takes a lot of imagination. Human beings can imagine a future situation that doesn't exist right now and then bring it into being. We can actually act that way. Does anybody have dogs or cats? Yeah. Yeah? They can't figure out what's going to happen later in the day or tomorrow or next week. If you leave the house for a week on a vacation and you leave out 7 dishes of food, they're not going to budget their food. They're just going to eat it all, right? They're not going to have a plan of, conserving their resources till the end of the week, right? Anyway. But, so the problem with fusion is that it's extremely difficult to get these atoms to come together, right? It's actually, in a sense, easier. The fission reaction was discovered first. That was actually discovered in 1896 by a guy named Becquerel. And he first discovered that certain minerals, he had left them next to photographic plates, and over time, the photographic plates would get developed. They would get a spot from the mineral, and it turned out it had uranium in the mineral, right? So he figured out that there was several types of radiation going on. He called them alpha particles, beta particles, and gamma particles. And then radium is another element that was discovered early on. Marie and Pierre Curie were the main discoverers of radium, and they discovered what this was doing. And they figured out that it would give off heat over a long period of time. It would give off a lot of heat. but it takes a long time. They figured out it would give off as much as 1 kilogram of radium would give off as much as 100 tons of coal, but you've got to wait a long time for that to happen. And in the case of radium, the half-life of radium is 1,600 years. So if you were able to wait that long, you get that equivalent amount of heat, but it's very slow. Now, what happens in the fission reaction, which is the uranium fission reaction, is that that's been a splitting of the atom itself. It's not just giving off radiation. It's splitting into other forms, and that gives off a huge amount of power, of energy, right? Now, with fusion, you're trying to force the atoms together. And since they both have a positive charge, they're not going to go together. People play with magnets and things like that. They know how this thing works. If you have two positive, they don't go together, right? Or two negatives. So you have to force them together. Now, in the conditions of a star or the sun, there's tremendous gravitational pressure and temperature. So that creates the pressure that allows this fusion reaction to go on for billions of years. But how do we do it on Earth? Well, there's two ways that we've actually figured out how to do it, two basic ways. One is called magnetic confinement, which is, the term is a tokamak, which is a toroidal confinement machine, which is a donut. It's a torus. The toroidal form is a donut. And what you have is big magnets around it, and then an electrical current going through it. And if you are aware of how electric currents work, a flowing current creates a magnetic field, and a magnetic field will create a current. So you put the gas in there, positively and negatively charged particles, and it will actually compress the gas. And they can get it enough pressure and enough temperature, fusion reactions do occur. The problem is that this becomes very difficult to sustain and keep it in the same form. Otherwise, the plasmas don't like to behave. They sort of slip out. It's like picking up Jell-O with string. You know, it sort of gets out of control pretty quick. So they have to figure out all kinds of ways to keep the pressure and the temperature and confine it and all that. They're getting closer and closer, and I'll make a point about that. There's a number of criterions for this, and they've figured out we've actually gotten, they've increased the success of the whole process by about 10,000-fold since we first started working on this back in the 50s or whatever. And if we get another 10-fold increase, that would be enough to get the fusion reaction going. So we've come a long way. And I can explain a couple of things about this. The other way of doing it is called inertial confinement, which is basically using extremely powerful lasers to bombard a little pellet which has the deuterium, tritium fuel in it. And that is a fuel pellet. It's extremely small. Yeah. And what happens is these whoops. A little joke. Now this is a those are the big lasers. The one in Lawrence Livermore, it's called the National Ignition Facility, and they have these gigantic lasers that actually, when they unleash the lasers, they're actually unleashing more power than is consumed by the entire United States in that moment. So it's a tremendous amount of power, all focused on this little tiny pellet of fuel. And it's been reported just recently that they actually got more power out just recently than they put into it in terms of the lasers hitting the pellet. That's not quite break even because the lasers themselves lose about 99% of their actual force in the process of being lasers, right? Anyway, so the power to create the lasers is a lot bigger still. So it's, well, they made a significant breakthrough on that just recently. Now, okay, this is an example of a gigantic tokamak fusion experiment going on. It's in France. It's called the International Thermonuclear Experimental Reactor, and the U.S. is a participant in this. You know, many, many, many countries are part of building this. And you can see the scale of this thing because this is one of the workers there.
Wow.
Right? Now, this thing is designed to actually prove that they could build a power plant, right? Right? And there's another, it's not the same one, I don't think, but there's a worker inside the chamber. And what these are is various magnets inside the chamber, or surrounding it. And then the gas will be put in a donut-type blob, and then they start. Now, what's happened is this. I want to backtrack a little bit. About 40 years ago, Lyndon LaRouche had a meeting, I think it was in New York City, with a bunch of top scientific researchers in fusion, because there were certain breakthroughs being made 40 years ago that showed that we could actually get on track on this thing. And he helped create an organization which we had created then called the Fusion Energy Foundation. And we published a magazine which became extremely popular called Fusion Magazine. This actually became, in the 1980s, the second largest circulating science magazine in the country, second to Scientific American. And in 1980, we got a bill passed by the Congress, by a Congressman Mike McCormick from Washington State. It was called the Fusion Engineering Act of 1980, and it specified a certain level of funding that would have actually gotten these test reactors and this proof of principle accomplished by just having a concentrated Apollo project type scale of effort and get it all done. There's dozens of labs doing this all over the world, Russia, China, France, United States, other parts of the world. But as you may know, there's a lot of bullshit about classification. There was a case back in the 70s where a top Russian scientist came to the United States and started writing a bunch of equations on the blackboard for some American scientists. And the Department of Energy classified that blackboard. Because we weren't supposed to know what they knew. Yeah. And the famous scientist, Dr. Edward Teller, who later on became a very big promoter of the Strategic Defense Initiative plan that Mr. LaRouche had organized and Reagan went with, thought this was complete crap, that we should have, this kind of classification, that this is destroying science. It's inhibiting any real scientific discovery. Besides, if it's a real scientific discovery, anybody who's serious can figure it out. These are not like secrets known to some secret society. These are just principles of the universe. And if you're a human being, you can figure them out. If you got the proper laboratory equipment and all that, you can figure it out. It's not, these aren't really secrets. Well, not even that. It's just that there's a complete, this is the oligarchy. This is the imperial system. They want to keep people stupid. They want to keep people backward. So they impose these systems of classification. They try to make people fearful of science and technology in general. They want people to be stupid and passive, and not too many of them, right? Anyway, so what happened was this. Fusion, the Mike McCormick bill got passed by the Congress in 1980. This is the last year of Jimmy Carter, who was a big anti-nuclear character. Reagan comes in.
Submarine captain.
Yeah, right.
Of a nuclear sub.
I think we used to call him a stoker on a nuclear submarine.
Oh, he was the stoker. He wasn't.
He was the coal shoveler. Shoveled the coal. Anyway, the point is that Reagan comes in and he's personally in favor of these kinds of programs. He obviously went with the SDI, but McCormick loses his election, and the funding, even though it was voted for by the Congress, never gets appropriated. So all these projects, this is what this chart goes through. Had we actually put the funding in There would have been a huge spurt in technological, scientific experiments going on. There would have been a second phase of building the actual experimental reactors to prove the principle. And by about 1993, under that kind of an accelerated program, we would have had a commercially workable fusion power plant. You know, in the case of the nuclear power plants, the first power plants came along in the early 50s, right? There was one in Shippingport, Pennsylvania. There was another one up in Massachusetts. You had the nuclear submarine, the Nautilus. You know, these things could be done. And a lot of that was because of the fact that we had this concentrated Tennessee Valley Authority-based power system that was able to develop all the resources for nuclear energy then. And then there was other more so-called moderate levels, which would have been taking a lot longer. But then you see what's happened. The actual funding is way below even ever getting it. It's like if you were trying to fly an airplane and your speed limit on the runway is 60 miles an hour, you're never going to get everywhere. You're never going to take off. So that's what's happened to us here. Now this goes back to my original question about how we discovered the principle of fire. I thought this was clever because, I don't know, the point is that it's a combination of the fact that obviously some early ancestor was kind of desperate and hungry and cold and wanted to benefit this fire. But there's also this idea that human beings play. They enjoy having an imagination and discovering things just by play. So there's an element of truth to that, probably. That somebody was playing around with this stuff, rubbing the sticks together, whatever they were doing. I don't know.
Well,
They realized that, aha, it's caused a spark to create. You know?
I don't remember whether I read this or it would be normal to think that lightning must have been a first glance at the possibilities and then acted upon.
Well, there's
By
another.
someone who recognized
Yeah,
that there was
there's-
something here.
Lightning is a little bit powerful, you know. It's just very explosive and
You mean
not-
it's more frightening than?
yeah, more frightening. One thing that was promoted or discussed by one of the scientists who was very important in this, who's a Russian guy named Vladimir Vernadsky. He actually hypothesized that there's these things called peat bogs, which naturally catch fire,
Right.
sometimes because of lightning, but they burn slowly. So a group of people could gather around this peat bog and realize that they're getting a lot of warmth and heat, and they figured out maybe they could throw their rabbits in the fire and have a nice dinner instead of, or they could cook their vegetables too, okay? Whatever they wanted to do. They would find out that was a much more better way of living, right? Anyway, so there might be some historical truth to that. I don't know. But now I want to make another point here, which is when I was growing up in the 50s, I had this book. It's called All About the Atom, and it basically describes everything from how we first figured out fire to how electricity works, static electricity, current, things like this, to nuclear power. This was written for a kid in the 50s, and it's pretty useful. I mean, yeah. But you don't see these kind of books in school today,
No,
right?
they don't even give science courses,
Yeah.
which I never had in public school.
But anyway, this was a popular book that was designed for children, and it kind of shows you how far gone how down we've gone. Now, on this, back to this chart about the sabotaging of the funding, there's actually an organization which came out very publicly recently called the American Security Project. A lot of prominent corporate type people and things like that are involved in it. They put out this white paper called Fusion Power, a 10-year plan for energy security. They're calling for an Apollo project now to get fusion, right? So there's the idea is that this could be done. If we have people within the institutions in various situations, right, who know that this has to be done. We can't keep on going with worrying about oil and natural gas and things like that. We've got to go for the next level. I'm going to show a 16-minute video which will give you some really incredible ideas of what this fusion technology can actually get us. It's not just a way of getting, it's not just a fancy way of boiling water. That's one of the things they say about a nuclear plant. All it is just a fancy way of boiling water. Well, the point is you can get a lot of other things out of it directly because you're dealing with such high temperatures, and you can actually use it to process all kinds of things. And let's see. Now this chart here goes through what's happened to us and what mankind has actually gone through in the last 200 years or so. You know, up until around the time of the American Revolution, it was always the case that all of the power sources that mankind used were primarily wood in some form or other, right? So for quite a while, we were just using wood. And after a while, you burn down all your forests, you know. You know, England used to have a lot of forests, and they found out that they didn't have any forests anymore because they were burning up all their wood. So some of us came here and found a lot of forests. We started burning them down. But then in the, just before the Civil War, we began to figure out that we could utilize coal. And of course, part of burning wood is you can create charcoal, which is a more concentrated form of wood to burn, creates a hotter temperature and all of that. But then coal became a mainstay of the industrial base of the economy. We had steam engines and all that. And then petroleum at the end of the 19th century. And of course, that is now the bulk of our power sources all over the world is petroleum of some form, right? Whether it's natural gas or oil or whatever. Now the problem is we made this discovery and how to apply nuclear processes, you know, starting in the 1950s, right? But it's never really gone anywhere. I mean, and as a matter of fact, the total energy consumption of the country is going down because we're shutting down all of our factories. We don't produce anything. We had this insane idea that we should just outsource all of our manufacturing to Asia or whatever, you know, and this goes back to Nixon and Henry Kissinger, the trip to China and things like that. But this was obviously a pretty dumb idea. It's left us with, you know, no economy, no real industry, no real jobs. Right? Hi. So if we had actually gone ahead with nuclear and then pushed the frontiers to get fusion, we'd be way up here in terms of our energy use. And I'm going to start this video in a second, but this gets at the idea that, yeah, we're in a situation where we've got to scrap this whole oligarchical system, which is keeping the lid on any kind of scientific breakthrough. We've got to scrap this whole financial system, which says you cannot invest in real industry and science or anything like that. You've got to keep on bailing out this gambling debt. We're going to scrap all that and go for a complete change in the economy worldwide. And I'll make another point, which is that this chart here, this map of the world, kind of features the fact that Asia is actually really the center of growth going on right now. I mean, one of the real problems we have is that the oligarchical powers behind Obama are getting us into war, which could get us nuclear war with Russia and China. It's not a smart idea because nobody would survive, right? Okay. And the Chinese and the Russians are putting out various blunt warnings that this is what we're going to get into. However, if we were collaborating with these areas through development projects, we could create massive amounts of new industry and jobs, railroad lines, power plants, fusion technology, of course. And we could bring the whole world up to a much higher level. Of course, you'd be putting all these speculators and these aristocrats out of work, right? Yes. Anyway, so let me just start this video it's, maybe turn the lights in a second. It's about 16 minutes long. It was produced by, so, we have the LaRouche Political Action Committee has a section of a group of young people. They call themselves the basement team because they work out of the basement of the home where Lyndon LaRouche lives. But they do a lot of this kind of really important, groundbreaking work. And
mankind is now on the verge of a great new era, the fusion economy.
louder?
The prospect now exists for a global economic revolution centered upon the high technology development of the Pacific region, driven by advanced infrastructure and the development of fusion power and technologies. The industrial development of the Trans-Pacific territory demands an increase of the production of materials on a scale unprecedented in the history of mankind. The 60 dams of the Nawapa 21 system alone will require 300 million tons of steel. This is already more than triple the current U.S. annual steel production and 1/5 of the total world steel production. Add to that the roughly 800,000 tons of steel for 42 nuclear desalination plants and the millions of tons that will go into the building of thousands of miles of double and triple tracked high-speed rail, stretching from the industrial centers of the East out to the newly built cities of the West and across the Bering Strait. In order to raise the standard of living of every nation of the globe to first world levels, world steel production will have to be in the range of 20 to 200 billion tons per year. Today, it is less than 2 billion tons. To reach this level of production, qualitatively new methods must be introduced, driven by fusion technologies, which leapfrog the existing power of production. This means we must examine the critical factors which increase productivity, technological advance, and its associated rise in energy flux density. Take the history of the production of the resource which is most used by weight and is the main component of steel, iron. Look at the rise in productivity of successive designs of iron furnaces measured in tons of iron produced per iron worker per year, measured as a function of energy per square meter per hour, or energy flux density. From colonial times to the 1830s, charcoal-powered furnaces enabled a production increase from about 7 tons of iron per worker to about 10. By the 1840s, the first coal-powered furnaces, burning much hotter, doubled the energy flux density of the furnace and more than doubled the productivity of each worker. Through the 1880s and into the beginning of the 20th century, the introduction of even hotter burning coke and a preheated blast of air drove both the energy flux density and productivity up another 3-fold. The next leap was spurred by the needs of the World War II mobilization, resulting in the introduction of pure oxygen to the furnace, as well as prefabricated iron pellets. The last leap was driven by NASA's Apollo program, bringing in the precision control and other improvements made possible by computers, culminating in an energy flux density 10 times higher and productivity 20 times higher than that of the early charcoal furnaces. The next evolution is in the domain of low and high temperature plasma processes. With much higher levels of energy flux density, plasma processing will dramatically increase the productivity of each worker. This will not only be true for iron production, but also steel, aluminum, titanium, and all other metals and resources needed for a modern society. Early plasma processing systems are already in limited use. Intermediate systems could become available with currently existing technologies, and advanced systems will become possible with thermonuclear fusion reactions. The history of early plasma processing goes back 100 years. High-powered plasma torch designs have been in existence since the early 20th century, first installed in the US in Baton Rouge, Louisiana in 1928, but did not come into significant industrial use until the 1970s and 80s. One basic design of the plasma torch is a narrow metal tube with an anode and cathode electrode into which a gas is injected. When the electrical discharge from the negatively charged cathode to the positively charged anode passes through the gas, the resistance of the gas causes it to heat. The region in the center of the gas flow, which surrounds the electrical discharge, is superheated and ionized, much as a bolt of lightning will ionize the surrounding atmosphere, transforming the center of the gas column into a plasma. Unlike conventional metal heating elements, which melt at thousands of degrees, this plasma has no inherent limitations. The use of plasma torches in steelmaking furnaces is a very significant improvement over earlier technologies, running as high as 15,000 degrees Celsius, with much higher efficiencies over earlier furnace designs. However, even at these high temperatures and efficiencies, metal processing, such as steelmaking, is still done by means of bulk heating and chemical reactions, melting the ore or scrap and adding materials into the furnace for the chemical reactions which result in pure steel or carefully crafted steel alloys. The next step in plasma processing will open up a new realm of possibilities in the degree of precision with which we can transform energy and matter. Rather than simply heating and melting with hot plasma, plasma itself, with all of its surprising properties, will be our new ore. Advanced plasmas from fusion reactors have already challenged our understanding of matter. Among other characteristics, at temperatures of 20 to 30 million degrees Celsius, hotter than the core of our sun, this rarefied gas of completely ionized elements reveals otherwise muted resonance characteristics specific to each isotope of each element. Fusion-powered systems, such as the fusion torch, will move materials processing and manufacturing beyond bulk heating and chemical reactions and into a non-thermal process of tuning the energetic characteristics of a plasma to interact with the resonant properties of the material being processed. And this will only be scratching the surface. We begin to enter a qualitatively new realm of possibilities in the degree of precision with which we can transform energy and matter. Inside of a fusion reactor, the fusion plasma, consisting of an ultra-hot ionized gas, reaches temperatures of tens and hundreds of millions of degrees. Some of this plasma can be funneled off as a direct process medium for industrial purposes. The plasma will first be taken through a connection zone to isolate it from the plasma of the reactor and remove high-energy neutrons from the process plasma. It is then moved to what is called the interaction zone. With the ultra-high heats and energies of fusion plasmas, metal ores, or any other known material fed into the fusion torch are not merely melted, but are immediately shock vaporized and become part of the plasma as separate ionized elements and electrons. This now low temperature plasma, full of the elements which made up the ore or other material, is discharged from the fusion torch to a separation chamber so that the individual materials can be separated from one another and recovered. Once in a plasma state, various methods can be used to select the desired elements and isotopes based on their atomic as opposed to chemical properties. The plasma separation process utilizes the unique resonating frequency, or cyclotron frequency, of specific elements to selectively separate them. As the plasma, spiraling around the guiding magnetic field, is passed through a chamber, it is zapped with a very specific electromagnetic frequency, precisely tuned to the resonant frequency of a selected isotope. The targeted ions are energized, widening their orbits just beyond the width of a series of collection plates at the end of the chamber. The rest of the non-energized materials simply pass through. In addition to other proposed methods of separation, there are designs to ensure that as the discharged plasma cools to temperatures at which chemical reactions begin to occur, the elements recombine into specific chemical formations. Called selective recombination, this method requires the fine-tuning of the plasma conditions in the separation chamber to be optimal for the formation of very specific chemical compounds, creating batches of very pure chemical structures tailored down to the isotopic level. The very fine control over matter, characteristic of plasma processing, allows for the creation of more advanced materials, impossible to create with lower energy flux density systems. For example, steels could be created with elemental and isotopic compositions controlled to a precision never before possible, enabling specialty steels that can handle higher temperatures and more neutrons from nuclear fission or fusion reactions with orders of magnitude less resulting radioactivity. This would allow more advanced reactors, which can either operate at higher energy flux densities or for longer periods. In general, bulk isotopic tailoring opens up a vast new domain of materials with revolutionary properties, available on a large scale. Intermediate plasma processing and advanced fusion-based systems will revolutionize the global economy. The high temperatures, energies, and other unique properties of plasma processing systems allow them to be used as universal machines. For example, while today's production of steel and aluminum by chemical means requires two very different multi-staged processes, a single plasma-based magnetic separation design can be adapted to produce everything from specialty steel to aluminum to cement and more. Even with intermediate stage plasma systems, which use not just the high heats of plasmas, but also the magnetic and other properties to directly process materials, deposits of low concentration ores and minerals will become economically accessible for the first time. For example, roughly 1/3 of the land area on Earth is covered by laterite soils, which contain significant concentrations of iron, aluminum, titanium, silicon, and hydrogen. While these soils could never be considered economically mineable deposits with existing systems, with intermediate plasma processing systems, this otherwise worthless dirt becomes a rich resource deposit. For higher concentration ores of the type typically mined and processed today, the productivity will leap to levels never before seen. Intermediate magnetic separation systems will allow cement production per worker to grow 10-fold, aluminum per worker 20-fold, and steel 60-fold. Advanced fusion-based systems will drive this even higher. Even trash from landfills could be completely vaporized and separated out into its constituent elements. All of this provides the proper physical economic perspective needed for the development of the Trans-Pacific territory, including the Arctic. Much of the territory in the western United States, running north into Canada and Alaska and across the Bering Strait, and down into Siberia and the Russian Far East, is completely undeveloped and features extremely harsh terrains. A fusion driver program not only allows the taming of this territory and the development of the immense resources of Siberia and the Arctic. Under a fusion driver program, this territory can become the most productive land mankind has ever created, creating revolutionary increases in physical economic growth over the next generations, which will drive and support the development of the global economy.
So, it's pretty powerful.